Happy Thursday, folks. My name is Emily Sherrio. I'm one of the admins here at Locally Optimistic, and I'm really excited to be the host today. We have a wonderful panel of folks who started their careers in data and have moved on to what we're calling data adjacent roles. So other roles in marketing and sales and product management where data and their data backgrounds shape their work, but it is not their primary function. We are recording today's session for anyone who can't join us live. They'll be able to catch the YouTube recording. Before we start, let's go ahead and introduce our panelists. Sid, I see you first on my screen, so why don't you kick us off? Please tell us your name, where you're based out of, and your current role. We won't worry about career path right now, but we'll come back to that later.
For sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining in. My name is Sid. I'm based out of San Francisco, and I work at a company called Sisu Data, which is a CDC-funded startup in the data space, where I lead our technical pre-sales, aka solutions engineering function.
Thanks, Sid. Brian, you're next on my screen. Take us away.
Yeah, thanks for having us. My name is Brian Gillet. I'm based outside of Chicago, Illinois, and right now I'm a product marketing manager at DBT Labs.
Thanks, Brian. And Nicole, last but certainly not least.
Hi, thank you so much for having me today. I'm Nicolle Eagan. I'm based in New York City, and I'm a product manager for Materialize, which is a streaming SQL database startup.
Thank you, Nicole. We're going to come back to you first. What I'd love to hear, all of you are in not data roles, right? When people describe their jobs, no one said, I'm an analytics engineer, or I'm a data engineer, or I'm a data analyst. But all of you have held those jobs before. Maybe you had a slightly different title, but you've come from that background. So Nicole, why don't you tell us a little bit about your career path? And specifically, how did you make the move from a data role into a product role? How did you know you wanted to make that move? For folks who have questions as our guests are speaking, don't forget, you can, add them in Slack. The channel we're using today is Meetup Data Adjacent Roles. So Nicole, take us away.
Yeah, absolutely. So right after I finished my master's degree, I landed a data scientist role, which though it was data scientist, I was more doing like analytics engineering and data engineering at a company called KX, which was a time series database company. And I really liked it. I was able to work on various projects and get a lot of exposure to different industries, which I really liked. But a couple of years into that, the company decided to move me into an R&D role for a new product that they were trying to launch. And that team originally was just me, a junior engineer, a salesperson, and a business analyst. And though we had like an industry spec for what we were trying to build, we had no idea what users wanted. I was kind of flying in the dark as terms of what I was coding on day-to-day basis. So it kind of forced me to kind of start talking to people and figure out, what do users want? Like, if I am going to build a tool, what am I doing? And throughout that process, I realized that I was really actually doing product work and I wasn't doing my engineering work anymore. And I really, really liked it. I loved being able to talk to people. I loved feeling like I had a direct impact into like what we are building. And once we figured that out and I transitioned back into doing my engineering work, I realized that I kind of didn't have that passion that I thought I had anymore for the how. I really had it for what we were building. And so when the pandemic hit, I kind of like put my career stuff to the side for a few months. But after that, I seriously thought about, making this transition and kind of following my passions. And so I ended up getting a certificate in product management just to build like a foundation for myself, because I felt like I was doing things ad hoc before, still in my engineering role. And then luckily enough, through a competitor channel on my company's Slack, I came across Materialize, which it was just a good fit given that I had experience in data and databases, especially in the streaming space. And so I knew that I was going to be able to leverage that experience going into a product role in that field. So luckily I applied and got the job, and here I am.
So Nicole, your last role was most recently a data role. That's right. You went.
Correct.
This is your first non or data adjacent role.
Correct. Yep, that's
And
right.
Brian, that's also true for you, right? This is your first data adjacent role.
No, actually, this would be my second one. So,
Ooh, tell us your path there.
sure. So prior to DBT Labs, I joined DBT in December of last year. Prior to that, I worked for a healthcare analytics company called Analytics and was a product manager there. But if I go even further beyond Analytics, prior to that, I was working for a health system here in Chicago called Northwestern Medicine. When I first joined there, I was an analyst. I actually joined a small health system. It was a 2-hospital health system. At that point in time, they really didn't have an analytics function. I joined the IT department and was there to help set up their analytics and help them do a better job at reporting on quality outcomes and driving improvements to quality of care that they provided to their patients here in the community that I live in. So it was a good opportunity for me to just dive headlong into the data and to figure out how we define all the different metrics and dimensions. We ended up merging with Northwestern Medicine. And that's when I really got to see data moving at scale. Started to build out some of our domain specific analytics there. So looking at, say, the ICU, the intensive care unit, or the emergency department, and trying to come up with data products for those specific parts of the health system itself, along with the team that I worked with. And there was also another part to our responsibilities, though, that's jumped out at me. Was we were sending a lot of data to a lot of different analytics vendors. And so I kind of followed the thread there and started looking into who are these vendors that we're sending data out to, and could it be a company that I want to work with, because it just seemed like it took up a lot of our time. Could there be a way to consolidate so that we're not sending 1,000 data extracts on a monthly basis out to different companies? Could there be a consolidator of that? And that's when I went looking around and saw, this unique problem and came across Analytics and saw that as an opportunity to move from being on the analyst, kind of building the reports and analytics themselves, to moving more into a product manager role. There, I initially took on a product manager role where we were looking at helping reduce the overall throughput problems within emergency departments at health systems, and then went on to help them build out their entire data platform, all the way from data ingestion, orchestration, over into the BI layer as well for that organization. And then just decided it was time to make another shift into closer to marketing. And that's where I decided to make that shift over into product marketing with DBT Labs.
Thanks, Brian. And Sid, you too have had multiple jobs out of the data role, though I think all for data tools companies, right? Do you want to talk us through your path a little bit there?
Yeah, for sure. So I started my career in a data adjacent role, then it became data first, and now it's again data adjacent. So my first job out of undergrad was actually in management consulting. So even though I was using Excel and SPSS and SAS back in the day, like SAS, like a legacy tool, I was barely spending like 5% of my time analyzing data, and 95% was creating slide decks. And so I craved that technical depth. And so then I moved into like an analytics consulting company where I truly got to spend like 90% of my time in Python, R, Tableau, and a bunch of other tools to finally do some analyses and then present those to final stakeholders. Then I joined graduate school at UT Austin, which was focused on analytics and data science. And it helped me expand my horizons outside of just like analytics, if you will. And so I dabbled a little bit in machine learning and data engineering. And then finally, when it came time to like explore what am I going to do after my grad school, I did some soul searching, spoke to a lot of people. And I think grad school really helps you think about what you truly are interested in. And then I took a leap of faith and joined solutions engineering. And then my previous company was Mode, where Ben Stansel was my boss for a brief period of time. And yeah, I mean, I just like this field of work. And yeah, so like that has been my journey so far, from adjacent to first, and then finally adjacent to a point where I feel like this is what I really enjoy, at least for the time being.
So I'm curious, Sid, as you think about your role and now having multiple roles outside of data, but still leveraging that data expertise, do you think this is your new career path, or do you see yourself going back into a data first role?
If I were to be candid, I don't see myself going back. And that's because I really like solutions and what it has to offer. Honestly, that's the first reason. The second reason is I've started thinking of careers as like a long-term play. So it's not the next 2 years, 18 months, it's actually 10, 15 years. And what do I want to do in that time period? And so if I were to go back into analytics, chances are that if I stay in that lane for, let's say, 5, 8 years, I'll be in the same position that my boss's boss is at. And so when I look at them, I don't, get that feeling that that is what I want to do when I'm in their shoes or when I'm at that stage. And then the third thing is compensation. I think solution just pays you much, much more. And so, yeah, I don't see myself going back, honestly.
That makes sense. Brian, Nicole, what about you? Is this a career detour, or is this a new career path for you?
Yeah, for me, this is definitely a new career path. I just find myself to be way more passionate about like the sorts of questions that product tackles. Sometimes I do miss coding. I'm not gonna lie, I miss getting into the weeds a little bit. But I'm lucky enough that in my role, I get to work really closely with engineering in comparison to like maybe some other product roles that wouldn't be as close. So I get that need fulfilled in that way.
Yeah, I'd echo a lot of what Nicole said. This is definitely the career path that I'm staying on, and have built a lot of empathy though for the data roles and folks that play in that data first function within the organizations. And I still, from time to time, love getting back into the coding side of things. But at the end of the day, it's tremendously helpful to have had that experience, because so much of what we do in product or product marketing is relying on data. And so being able to even just start an analysis on my own, and then being able to, if I get stuck, go to our data team members and get that last mile. It's tremendously helpful to at least be able to get 80 to 95% of the way there in an analysis, and then be able to partner with the data team to get it over the finish line.
Oh, Brian, save that thought, because that's definitely a train I'm going to want to come back to. Before we do, we've had a couple of more people join. So a couple of reminders. If you're joining, please make sure you're on mute unless you're coming off mute to ask a question. And then the Slack channel we're using for discussion today is Meetup Data Adjacent Roles in Locally Optimistic. So please do share questions there. Will asks a question, and I know Will is here. So Will, if you'd like, you can come off mute and ask your question.
Sure. Yeah, I was just wondering how going from data first to a product manager role kind of separates you from somebody in product management who has not had any data first history.
Go ahead.
If I could jump in, I think going right off my last point, Will, I think one of the key things that I found for myself versus when I was joining Meta-Analytics and I had other product management colleagues there, was just how much more I could dig into the data more quickly and be able to come up with insights that way. Versus, a lot of times they would have to spend extra cycles or put in requests to get the data to drive their decisions. And I'd say one other thing too, though, that I love about the data profession itself, it really gives you a front seat to understanding how the business operates, because you start to understand, oh, I've been working with the Salesforce data. This is how the sales process goes. Or, oh, I'm working with this ERP data. This is how our financials work. And I think that also gives you a lot more insights into just how businesses operate behind the scenes. And that can then be used to inform when you're getting into like feasibility analysis for a product manager.
Nicole, anything you want to add there?
I think Brian actually pretty much nailed it. It's all about like leveraging your data skills to give you insights into the business. So I think what he said is well on.
Cool, thank you. And Chloe has a question too, and I saw Chloe here. Chloe, do you want to come off mute and ask your question?
Yeah, sure. I was curious for folks, what made you make the decision to move towards a data adjacent role, whether that's in product or solutioning versus data people management or data leadership? Was it more in response to sort of the types of roles available on both those tracks, or just liking what the day-to-day of one looked more like than the other?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that. For me, it was liking the day-to-day more. I really enjoyed still being like IC and having kind of like in the trenches experience. However, personally, in 5 years, I actually want to be moving into more of a people management role, but just more in product rather than in engineering. So it's a really good question. I do want to be people manager, just in a product role.
Sid, I think you do manage people now, right?
Yeah. So people management is kind of like a different dimension than moving from a data first role to a data adjacent. I think it's like a completely different lane altogether. And just so I'm clear, is the question around how do you think about people management as opposed to moving out of data first, or how do you do both?
No, I think the question is more sort of, as you're looking at different forks in your career path and continuing to grow and advance, what made one option, sort of continuing up the chain of people management in a data first role, less appealing than what you're doing now?
Got it. Okay. I can walk you through how I made that decision. And so hopefully, that'll share some light. So I created like a mapping of my strengths and my weaknesses. And then the other thing was my short-term and long-term goals. And so when I did that mapping, I realized what I wanted to do at the time being was something that's not in a data first role. And you can actually pick and choose. And that's the thing about solutions. If I want something that is more heavy on the data end side, I can be a solutions architect for Databricks. If I want to use DBT, I can be a solutions architect for DBT Labs and then move up from there. And then the other thing when it comes to people management is that it's like a different way of living and different thought process. And that takes a completely different skill set altogether. And so in the last couple of years, 2.5 years, ever since I've been managing people, it requires a lot more empathy, honestly, than being an IC. Doesn't matter where you are as an IC. So that's a completely different path that requires its own sort of, you have to look inwards and ask yourself, is that something that you're willing to do at this point? And why do you want to do it? Because these days you can move up the ladder and be a staff level IC and get the same comp structure as a manager. So asking yourself the why do I even want to be a people manager? What's in it for me is probably, I think, a good way to get the balls rolling on that one.
And we'll be having a panel next month, date TBD, on moving from IC roles and into management roles and back and forth. And we'll have a couple of people with different experiences there. So if that's something you're more interested in, just on that pendulum, specifically in the data space, we'll be covering that a little bit more there. Brian, anything you want to add to Chloe's question?
Yeah, I think one thing, and this was kind of Sid, going off of your idea of like the mind map you went through. When I was at Northwestern, as I was leading there, I actually helped manage a team of analysts while also contributing to the team's work products. And at the time, what really was entering heavy into my equation and my thought process was I wanted to move away from the typical kind of request process. We were very request driven versus having a roadmap and kind of saying, over the next year, this is what we look to build and deliver and the value that we're going to create. Now, I know the organization has shifted now, and they since have kind of shifted more towards, I think, what we're seeing now with a lot of data teams setting up their own roadmaps and being more value driven. But at the time, it was much more IT oriented, where it was very ticket driven. So I wanted to make that shift to going and seeing what the market needed, putting together a roadmap, and helping to deliver upon that. So that was a big point in my overall decision.
So a question I have, and Nicole, let's start with you here. When you're interviewing for that non-data job, so in your case for product manager, how do you shape and frame your experiences as a data analyst or a data scientist or an analytics engineer into things that make you a good candidate for that product manager role? How do you leverage your existing experiences and use that to showcase your skill set while acknowledging there are things you've never done before?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for me, it was more talking about like my problem solving skills and my analytical skills as like pros and going into a product role. And product management, sometimes you have to like dig really deep into either like customer issues or like what exactly is this feature and how is it going to benefit, and being able to problem solve and like go deep into those questions and figure it out, I think helped me along in those sorts of interviews. Trying to think of what else. Yeah, I think for me that was it. Yeah, and then being able to like communicate with engineers as well. Like obviously being an engineer, I've had the experience of those sorts of like the problems that engineers usually face. And so being able to leverage that experience in my role has been really valuable as well.
Brian, Sid, similar question. How do you frame your data experiences, maybe even as a hiring manager, seeing people with only data backgrounds looking or interviewing for solutions engineering roles or product marketing roles? How do you consider their experiences? How do you frame your background for a non-data role or a data adjacent role?
I can go first and maybe talk about solutions. So when I interviewed at Mode, they tested for my SQL skills. But then besides that, I think solutions at the end of the day is a go-to-market role. And I think selling is very important. And a lot of times people who come, including myself, who come from technical backgrounds, they don't look at selling as being respectable in many ways, because it appears that you're departing from your technical roots. And so making sure that you're approaching it in the right mindset is, I think, the second thing that I look at is, can this person sit in front of a client, know all the answers, and still not act like they're the smartest person in the room, because that's not how you would handhold them into understanding what is it the value that your tool provides. So I think that's a big one. And then the third thing is, can they work alongside salespeople? Because in analytics, most of the variables are in my control. I have the data set, I have the Python libraries at my disposal, and so I can spend a couple of hours and get the output done. Selling is a team sport. A lot of the variables are out of your control. And so how do you act under pressure when not all of the variables are in your control is the third thing, which I think typically in an analytics profile, you don't have to go through that sort of uncertainty in your day-to-day life, I would say.
Brian, I see you talking, but you're muted.
Yeah, thank you. That was a great answer, Sid. I like that last part too. That was incredible. I think the biggest thing when I was making the transition was just conveying, that I had the background and understanding of the problems that health systems were facing. So I made kind of I call it industry lateral move, which I think helped, going from working at a health system to a healthcare analytics company. And then I also highlighted a lot of the problems that were cropping up within the organization that we were having to come to understand and put together requirements, and then delivering and messaging what we had built and being able to have that executive presence. That was one of the great gifts that I had from us merging with a very large organization, was I got to work at a very high level with many different executives throughout the health system. So it helped me in improving my communication skills, which was really important from a product manager level. You had to be comfortable with going into a meeting with your customers or prospects and be able to talk about your roadmap and be able to deal with, like Sid was talking about, those uncomfortable situations where someone's going to push back and say, we need this feature for this deal to happen. And you have to be able to navigate that type of situation to fully understand the need and to align it to what you're doing with your roadmap, because you're always going to have more things that you want to build than you have time or engineering hours to work with. So it was really that communication skill, having that lateral move in the same industry and being able to relate to the problems there.
It's interesting how so much of it comes down to like not the engineering and code specific things, but like the soft skills of how well can you communicate, how well can you project manage, how well can you keep on top of these things, no matter what your job or job title is. So thanks. I want to go, we've got a couple of more questions that have come in the Slack channel. So Will, you've got one about apprehensions. You want to come off mute and ask our panel?
Yeah, yeah, just following up on what Chloe asked, if you guys have, or sorry, if you all had any apprehensions in moving to a data adjacent role, and once you did, if those were alleviated or not, or if you still have itches that you want to scratch, like Nicole mentioned with coding.
Yeah, for me, some apprehensions where I felt product is really interesting. It's on the intersection of engineering and sales and marketing. And so I didn't have a lot of experience. I had a little bit in sales, not anything in marketing. And so I had a little bit of, oh my goodness, how am I gonna fulfill that part of my product role? What is this going to look like? Felt a little bit fish out of water. But for me, it was just kind of throwing myself in the deep end in some of those more like go-to-market conversations and just say, hey, I'm new to this side of the business. And luckily, I've had a great team that's been able to sort of help me through that transition. But yeah, that was probably my biggest apprehension taking on a product role.
I didn't think about it in the forward-looking way. I was thinking about it like apprehensions of what you were leaving behind in data first, but that's also thank you.
Yeah. For me, I scratched that itch, as you say, in terms of dog fooding my product. So trying to understand if features that we're launching or thinking about might be successful, just getting my hands deep in the product, which for me is just a lot of SQL, which is cool. So I do get to dabble a little bit and scratch that itch.
Jake, you've got the next question. I see you here. You want to come off mute and ask?
Yeah. Yeah. So my question is, like, it seems you all are kind of at data companies, right? So very related to data. Have you thought about like ever doing a similar or different role at a non-data company?
I'll raise my hand on that one and say, right now, not yet. I think that there's still a lot more work to be done in this space, especially around just helping folks see that end-to-end picture of where the data is moving. So I think that there's plenty of problems to be solved.
And quick, I guess I'll add quick. It's not, I guess, about your next job choice, but yeah, even if it's like a ways out too, if that helps soften the question. I will resoundingly say, yeah, probably. Yeah.
Brian, you said something earlier that if I can build on top of Jake and pull this thread a little bit, something I think about in my career and I talk to people about in their careers is about industry. And it's not necessarily just being at a data tools or a dev tools company, but I think of it even at a slightly more zoomed out way of like, I'm at a SaaS company or I'm at a direct to consumer e-commerce company. And thinking about your career in that context kind of gives you a broader umbrella to think about it. So you're all at data tools SaaS companies today. I'm thinking through my head, that's true for all three of you. Yeah, so you're all at data tools SaaS companies today, and maybe you take those skills and move into other SaaS tools that are in dev tools or and whatever other kind of SaaS, to CRM, you go to Salesforce or whatever, right? If you do that, do you think there's something fundamentally different about how you use your data skill set along the way, or the things you've acquired in a data first role?
I think it'll still be relevant in terms of, it's so ironic. I was just talking to a family member about this very question earlier today in terms of where do I see myself, 10 years down the road. And truth be told, out of college, I started with a equities research firm. So that's always been interesting to me. And I love understanding how companies work. So eventually, long term, I'd like to get into a role where I can help on the investment side and putting capital to work. And I think intrinsic in that is understanding how businesses work from a marketing or product or engineering perspective or finance, but then being able to use data to inform the investment decisions that you're making. So I think that it definitely will still stay with me. It may not be as intense, but I think you can, with SQL and knowing some of the different data platforms, you can understand it. But I think it'll also play into, I've gone through some transactions before and some of the due diligence, and a lot of it really started focusing in on the product development lifecycle, how your tech stack was built out, and how data literate was the organization. A lot of those questions started to come up in due diligence processes.
Nicole, Sid, anything either of you want to add there?
I don't see myself moving to a non-data profile. I still use SQL and data modeling for like 50 to 60% of my job right now. And I think my data background gives me superpowers that I don't think I'll have if I move to a company that's not data first at the moment. So yeah, I don't see myself moving there.
I personally spent some time in an operations role in a previous company, and I said that data went from being like the thing that I did to the hammer that I used on everything. And so no matter what job I have, you cannot take away my access to the data warehouse. Nicole, did you want to add something there?
Yeah, I think for me, I'm similar to Sid. Like right now, I can't see myself moving away from data. However, if I happen to come across a product or an idea that I just completely fell in love with that maybe is totally outside of the space, then I would definitely move in that direction.
Well, thanks.
And thanks for the question, Jake. I'm curious, starting a new job is always hard to start, independent of whether or not you've done the role before. How do you approach starting a new role differently, or differently from just starting a job you've done before at a new company? Is there any words of advice you'd share with our audience for folks who are making this jump for the first time?
I have a piece of advice, and I'm going to mention Ben Stancil again. So I didn't realize this at the time, but I think when you're making a jump, especially to something that you've never done before, it's very important to work for someone or report into someone that knows that industry really well, because they'll help you grow into that profile way faster. And then there's so many benefits in terms of working for someone who's an expert. That's number one. The second thing is, on a tactical front, talking to people who have done it before. So from like a solutions perspective, there's a group called the Pre-Sales Collective that is Seeley Institute, Sales Engineering Leadership Institute. I actually was fairly active in the first few months within both of those groups so that I could, assimilate a lot of the things that I didn't know about before. And so talk to as many people who've made that jump and work for someone who's done it before and can guide you for the first few months in ways that other people cannot.
I'll just say +1 to Sid, 100%. So
again, the soft skills and the mentorship. It's true in every job, right? No matter what our titles are. Now, I would be remiss to not mention, today's panel is being hosted by Locally Optimistic, which is a community for data professionals. And you all are part of LO, so you identify as a data professional still. How do things like LO fit into your professional development, even though now you're in this data adjacent role?
For me, being a part of the community itself and why I wanted to join in was I didn't want to lose touch with where the data practitioners were going. I wanted to keep in touch and understand the changing nature of the industry itself. So it was really an opportunity to kind of plug in. I do a lot more observing and understanding there rather than trying to post out. But it's been super helpful in that regard to be able to just see the conversations and understand and try to surmise what are the newer problems that are being faced by data teams.
Yeah, I would be a big +1 to Brian. I'm also more of an observer and listener in the community, but I love seeing in some of the channels, like all of the problems and challenges that people are facing, especially as Brian said, everything, the environment and the community is changing. So for me, it's a good sort of like input to my job and the product.
Yeah, it's a +1 to what Brian and Nicole said. The only thing that I would add is that competitive landscaping at Sisu is a part of my job responsibility. And we are in metrics and everybody is talking about being metrics first. And so I think the discussions channel, the data stacks channel are the two channels, especially in Locally Optimistic, that I keep a close eye on. And then of course the DBT Slack channel, they have their own metrics channel where a lot of discussion is happening these days around that topic. So yeah, that's how I consume.
So it sounds like for you all, you get a chance to keep a pulse on the industry in a lot of ways. And as a data practitioner, I also use LO to keep a pulse on the industry because things are changing and growing so quickly. So I appreciate that there's not that much of a difference. I'm going to take a second here to pause and open it up to our audience. Does anyone have any questions they want to come off mute and share? It's okay if you haven't posted them in Slack, but now would be a great time. Brett, I'm going to verbalize your question for you since I think you posted it in the chat since you can't come off mute. But Brett asks, what was the thing? Oh, it's a question for me.
Yeah, like you said LO, or it's like saying on top of the industry. I just like was curious what that was.
Yeah, LO is Locally Optimistic. We're the community that's hosting today's panel. So if you're interested in joining, you can go to locallyoptimistic.com. And at the top, there's a like community tab where there's a join the community option.
I thought you guys had something else, but yes, very familiar with Local Optimistic. Okay, thank you.
Okay, great.
I'll ask the opposite of Emily's question, which is what value are you not able to derive from LO and where do you find that?
Well, it's a great question, Will. And I think the way that I look at it is, and Sid kind of mentioned this as well, it's getting specific to the product marketing role itself, getting insights into how a product marketer could use data. Because it seems a lot of discussions that I follow on Locally Optimistic get more into the data engineering side versus closer to the problem to be solved. So if it's a shortening the sales cycle, that's something where a lot of times I'll jump to Sendbird or the Product Marketing Association to then kind of pick up the conversation from there and then start to tee it up in that way. So I don't know if it'd be a future where we kind of start to look at maybe a channel where we talk about product marketing as it relates to data or product management, how that relates to data within Locally Optimistic.
And do you think some of that is like at a company, like a lot of time, I feel like we spend our time just setting up and kind of managing a stack, right? Do you think that's not why that is, or?
Yeah, Jake, I definitely do, because there is so much change going on right now. And maybe in a few years, and for some companies, they could be over this, over that part of their journey and kind of moving towards more data driven and adopting cloud data warehouses and new ways to work with data and working with data more as a product. I think we'll eventually see that it drives more to the outcomes and the business value. But I think right now there's just so much happening in terms of how do we organize the data. We have so much more data that we're trying to consume and organize and surface, that we're still in that space right now where that's still being wrestled with. And I think once that calms down a bit, then that's the point in time where we'll start to see that those discussions around specific business problems crop up more and more. But I will say, I do think we see some of it on like the CRM side of things. That one certainly comes up from like a sales, because I think that's one where a lot of folks have focus. But as you get into like your ERP situations, those will be further down the line.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking about that from like the recent, well, not criticism, I guess, but like, thoughts around data council and how it was all just data practitioners and no concern for the end user or the business or anything like that. And, I'm wondering how, and maybe this is a bigger discussion and maybe Emily and the LO admins don't want this, but how can we grow like a community like this to start involving more people like you so we can get that business side and like kind of bridge the gap between everybody?
If you want to make a data product marketing or a data solutions engineering channel to talk about careers in this, do it. Channels are free.
Cool.
Yeah, go for it. No blockers here. Or data product management. Like, please, all the more the merrier, and the more conversations. And we're here to make this tent as big and as welcoming as we can. So. All right, well, we are right at time. I want to wrap up with a big thank you to our panelists, Brian, Sid, and Nicole. Thank you very much for spending some time with us today. I will upload this recording to YouTube and then share to the Locally Optimistic YouTube channel, and then share it in the Slack channel for today's meetup. If you have any feedback on the meetup or the discussion, don't hesitate to reach out. Feel free to DM me directly in Locally Optimistic. But thank you very much to our panelists. It has been wonderful having you, and we're very grateful for your contribution to the community today. And thanks to our audience for coming and for engaging. It makes it that much more fun.
Thanks, everybody. This was great.
Thank you. Have a good day.